You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 143. Derek Sivers is here, and we're talking about reinvention.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
From Nelson, New Zealand, it's Derek Sivers. Derek, you sound so good to be so far away.
The wonders of the internet and a good microphone.
It's amazing, amazing. I've known you for a long time, and when I first met you, you were a musician. After that point, had a musician services company, we'll call it, CD Baby, one of the largest music distributors in the world. That's what it became. I'd like to start off talking about just the transition from musician to business person. What was that like for you?
I think every musician is an entrepreneur, whether they call it that or not. You know, you can define it broadly, but the idea of being self-employed and not having a boss, like not having a job, but the idea that any money you're going to earn is going to come from your actions. You're going to have to hustle to earn a buck, and you're going to have to convince people to pay you. It's such a different mindset from the people that just get a job. So, for example, people sometimes ask me the opposite question where they say, what was it like to get up the courage to quit your job to start your own business? And I just kind of have to squint and look at them like, no, I never did that. Like, I never had a job. I was never in that mindset. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of people, maybe just through their upbringing, assume that their life is going to be steady. They're going to get a job and have an employer with a good pension and an insurance plan. And then they have to summon up the courage to quit the safety and start their own thing. But every musician knows that it's like, you decide you want to be a musician, you're deciding that your life will be a hustle. The skills I learned as a musician that I applied to CD Baby, it was some of that stuff. It was more of a mindset. But I think the most important thing, the thing that really made CD Baby a success, was more of the understanding the musician mindset, right? Like someone from Brazil will always understand Brazilians better than you. I understand musicians better than most people. It's like I was a full-time musician for 13 years. I went to Berklee College of Music for 4 years. All my friends were musicians. I was a freelance guitarist paying my rent by playing guitar for people. I toured the college market for 5 years. I produced and engineered people's records. I emptied my bank account to buy a ticket to a music conference in hopes of getting my demo into the hand of someone who could give me a record deal. You know, I know that mindset very intimately. I'm a native. So in the dot-com boom, when mp3.com was valued at $1 billion and everybody wanted to make a music startup, you'd think that there would have been a lot of competition for me and my little CD Baby startup. And there were dozens and dozens of startups with millions in VC money, all trying to reach the same musicians that I was, but it was no competition. I understood the musicians in a way that they never would. It's like I knew how to speak to the musicians' concerns and aspirations because I'd lived through all of them myself. So when a musician would call or email CD Baby and we'd have even, a 2-minute chat about their music and what they're doing, I would win their loyalty in a way that no deep-funded .com could pry away with a slightly better offer. Yes, in my years as a musician, I learned how to hustle, how to negotiate and things like that. But I think it's ultimately all moot unless you're really offering something that your clients want.
Something else I have to say about the success of CD Baby that I've got actually 2 great examples for. One of you, when you were a musician, when I first got your musician press kit, I was like, wow, this guy it was like a major label press kit. And when I first got your CD, you had actually had a CD-ROM with it. You were one of the first guys that I'd ever seen do that. The other guy, only other person I'd ever seen do it was Prince. And you were an independent guy. You didn't skimp on those things. And the CD Baby example I want to give you is I remember talking to you on the phone, and you said, David, I just spent $1,500 on a shopping cart. I said, what? 15, like I'd gotten a free one. I'd traded it out for some programming, right? And,
Right.
and I think that what you brought to the table was not only the knowledge of musicians and your audience, because you were your audience, but you did things right even when it wasn't easy to do things right. While everybody else was spending money on Aeron chairs and stupid things, right? You were really concerned with the experience of the end user and the experience of the clients that you were serving.
Yeah, and I guess that stuff just grows out of your personality, right? Like some people want to be that important businessman in an Aeron chair, wearing a very nice suit with an important title and business cards that would make an American psycho happy, you know? So some people want to be that person, and, you know, whatever, more power to them. If that's what they really want, then, hey, we shouldn't be trying to convince them to be like me. But then vice versa, like it's just about kind of doing things the way that you want them to be done, or the way that you think that your clients or customers would like them to be done. So yeah, that was just my style, I guess.
You also had a big transition within CD Baby. I know it was can we say it was a sole operation for a little while?
Definitely. Yeah.
So you, as a musician, if I'm correct, it started because you were actually selling your own music. Other people asked you, hey, can you sell my music too? And CD Baby was born.
Yeah.
But let's talk about going from working in the business to working on the business. I remember I visited you, this is probably 10 years ago in Los Angeles, well after CD Baby was going. And you said, yeah, come on up to my house. And I did. And it was a couch with cushions on the floor, you and a laptop and a bunch of programming books. And I remember we hung out for the afternoon. You had one call about CD Baby. I think you gave him a password or something. But other than that, it seemed to me, just from an observer, that it was a hands-off thing. Now, how did it go from being hands-on to completely hands-off and doing only the parts of the business that you wanted to?
That's such a good question. I think most self-employed people get caught in this delegation trap, right? Like you're so busy, you're doing everything yourself, and you know you need help, but to find and train someone would take more time than you have, right? So that's kind of what everybody I meet who feels they should be delegating says, is like, I'm overwhelmed. I know I need to delegate, but I don't even have time to delegate. I don't have time to hire and train someone. So instead, you keep working harder until you just break someday. I don't remember what year you came to visit me, but in 2001, when CD Baby was 3 years old, I had 8 employees, but I was still doing really everything else myself. I was working from 7 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week. Everything still went through me. It was kind of the model of like the main guy and then his assistants, I guess is probably how it was structured at the time.
You're like Santa Claus and the elves.
Right, thank you. But then I hit my breaking point. I almost moved to Hawaii. Seriously, I don't know if I ever told you about this, but I actually booked a flight and found an apartment to rent in Maui. And I was about to do it. I just wanted to get away. I wanted everybody to leave me alone. I couldn't handle just everybody asking me questions every 5 minutes. I wasn't getting any work done. I just wanted everybody to leave me alone. But then I realized if I would have just gotten on that plane to Hawaii, that I would have been running from my problems instead of solving them. So after a long introspective night of thinking and writing, I got myself into the delegation mindset just really by necessity. I knew that I had to make myself unnecessary to the running of my company, or else I was going to die, So the next day, I went in to work, I guess, with like a new sense of mission. Like, okay, I got to do this thing. I got to make myself unnecessary. This is now top priority. So as soon as I walked in the door, some employee asked me some random question about what to do in a certain scenario. But this time, instead of answering him, I said, okay, wait, before I answer, let's call everybody together here for a minute. So all the guys over at the packing table is like, okay, everybody, come around. Okay, Jeff here just asked me this question. And I repeated the question for everyone. And then I answered the question, but more importantly, I made sure to explain the thought process and the philosophy behind my answer. So it wasn't just do this. It was like, do this, but here's why. Like, here's the philosophy. So for example, anytime somebody wants their money back, say yes. And here's why. Because we may be getting a little screwed in that small transaction, but by being the nice guy and giving them what they want, they're now going to go out and have no animosity towards us for all future time because we refunded their money. They're going to spread good word of mouth saying we're the good guys that did the right thing. We didn't do the greedy thing. And that word of mouth will bring us more income than we're losing on this one transaction. So anytime somebody wants their money back, just give it to them. Don't worry about it. And that's the philosophy why, right? So I'd share the thought process like that. But then I had to make sure that everybody around me understood the answer. So I kind of asked a few people. I made sure that they had my full attention. Are you listening? Can you repeat it back to me? When this situation comes up, now what do you do? Asked this guy over here. He said, great. So I said, Lindsay, can you please open up a new text document? Or let's start a little wiki on the website and let's write down the answer that I just told everybody to this situation. And we're going to start a manual. And so starting from that point, every time someone would ask me something, we'd all stop and repeat this process. Okay, everybody gather around. It was just important to me to make sure that everyone in the company understood, not just one person, so that the philosophy and the mindset would get passed on to new people that were hired. And also it was nice that meant that people could be more mobile inside the company, right? They could get promoted to different roles easier because they had seen the process that we're all doing. Yeah, it was hard work, man. It was there was a few months of really hard work to keep doing this process and keep delegating everything and teach everyone everything that was still my job. Anytime I noticed that something in our process still required me to do it, I'd say, okay, this is a problem that needs to be fixed. And I'd make sure that at least one, ideally everyone, knew how to do this thing I was doing. And it worked. Within a few months, all the questions had stopped, and I started working from home, and nobody called, as you saw. It just turned out that everything was just working great without me. In fact, it was actually kind of weird for me at first. I used to call into the office, and I'd just call the main number, and they'd pick up, and they'd say, CD Baby. And I'd say, hey, Trey, it's Derek. How's it going? He's like, hey, cool, man. I'd say, how's everything going? And he'd say, we're cool. Like, any troubles? Anything going wrong? He'd say, no, man, we're cool. I'd say, all right, well, if you need anything, I'm just here at home, so just let me know. And he'd say, all right, we're all set, man. It's good. That was while I was still living in Portland, Oregon, where the company was based. But then, yeah, my girlfriend at the time moved down to LA to go to film school. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I followed her down there, and I moved to LA as kind of my way of solidifying this new setup. I lived in LA for the next, 4 years while my company grew up in Portland. And I think, honestly, man, that's when CD Baby really took off, was after I left, because like you said in the question, now I was free to work on the business instead of in the business. Now I was free to improve things instead of just managing things. You know, it wasn't just putting out daily fires. Now I could really build the new things that were going to improve the business in the future. So yeah, the growth after I left the daily management of the company was much bigger than the growth that happened while I was managing it.
You know, something I've noticed with a lot of entrepreneurs is that, and this is just people in general, we like to stay busy because we think it makes us important. It gives us something to do.
Yeah.
We're not really needed as much as maybe we think we are.
Absolutely.
So we stick with this a lot in part because it's an identity. And that leads me to my next question. You had an identity within, I think it was beyond just musicians. It was within the .com space. I mean, here you were meeting with Steve Jobs and, hey, we want all the CD Babies catalog, and you liberated all this independent music to go around the world, and you paid musicians every week, and everybody loved you. Yet you decided to walk away from CD Baby, sell it. And I'd love to know more about the process that went through your head, because this is, what, a 12-year journey? How long did CD Baby last with you at the home?
About 10 years, actually, yeah.
So it's 10 years. It's a good chunk of your life, and you were CD Baby for a lot of people. So What was it like to walk away?
Well, I thought I would never sell for the obvious reasons. It's like, I am CD Baby. CD Baby is me. And I loved it too. I thought I was going to do CD Baby for the rest of my life. It was my baby. I mean, there's a nice pun in the name of the company, right? Like, this was my baby. And then I reached that point at about 9 years into it. I had just done a complete rewrite of the software, the software behind the site, like the software that ran cdbaby.com. And still to this day, I think it's the greatest creation I ever did was that rewrite of the software. It was like the culmination of everything I had learned up till that point. I was never a great programmer, but that rewrite of cdbaby.com was like the culmination of 10 years of learning what works and what doesn't. And it just kind of felt like a finished painting. You know what I mean? Like when I finished that, I finished it like in October or November before the big Christmas rush. Christmas rush came in and the software worked perfectly. There were like no flaws, no crashes, no nothing. It was like, wow, I did it. Like this business it's faster than ever. It's smoother than ever. Everything's going amazingly well. And then I was in that time like after Christmas, this kind of exhale where every year that was my time to focus on what's next. You know, being a retail store, right? Like Christmas is the big, big month. And after that's done, you kind of exhale and look to the future. But this year, it had been 10 years, and I really had no future visions left. It's like I was looking at my future plans for the company and the things that I'd written down, and honestly, I couldn't really see anything that seemed worth doing. All my future ideas were going to be a ton of work for a little reward. So you could say that I had run out of vision. I was talking to Seth Godin about this. He's always kind of an occasional mentor to me. He's like such a nice guy that always answers his email no matter how busy he is. And I told him my scenario, and he just replied back saying, if you care about your customers and your clients, your musicians, you need to sell. I was like, sell? I'd never considered selling the company. I'd always had offers to buy the company, and I'd always shooed them away. But this time I really considered them. I thought about what it would be like to sell my baby. So whenever I had thought about it before, like I would just entertain the notion, you know, maybe the first few times I got an offer, I would entertain the notion in my head for a few minutes, and I'd be like, no, out of the question, no way. But now, 10 years later, for the first time, I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I think I could do it. I think it was that feeling that we all get at certain times in our life when you know you need a major change, right? Like for some people, it's a divorce or quitting alcohol or death of a parent or something like that. Something happens where you say, I need a real major change in my life. So for me, that's how it felt. Like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for a major change now. So I get asked by other entrepreneurs all the time, like, how will I know when it's time to sell my company? But I think you'll know.
But I would imagine it's probably never what you expect, just like quitting alcohol, just like divorce, just like marriage or having a child. What was it like for you? Was it what you expected?
Well, it helped that I had a couple people I knew, a couple friends who had sold a company before. And I asked them, like, what are the pros and cons? What's the best thing? What's the worst thing? What are the surprises? And everyone said that the worst part was having to be an employee of the new parent company. As soon as they said that, of course, I just shuddered at this horrible notion of having to report to a boss for the first time in 20 years. And at my company, like, oh, could you imagine, like, you know, on Friday you're the boss and on Monday you come in and you're not the boss anymore? Like, no way. So I made that an upfront requirement that the minute the money transfer happened and the deal was done, I was gone. Like, no, I'm not going to be an employee. I'm not going to be a consultant. I just needed to make a clean break and move on with my life. So luckily, yeah, there were no big surprises, no regrets.
I've heard so many stories of guys that will sell with the contingency that they stick around as a consultant or an advisor. Yep. And I know guys, more than one, that have left early from that because it's so bad.
Yeah.
They don't care about the extra money that they're leaving on the table. Like, listen,
yeah.
keep the $5 million you promised me. I'm
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
outta here.
Yeah. It's just, there's selling a company is a bit like a divorce. And I have been divorced once, that there's that moment where you really break up, when you and your partner say, like, I think we're done here. That's really the moment that you divorced. That's when you really broke up. And then sure, 8 months later, you're finally signing your name to some piece of paper that legalizes it. But really, come on, that's just paperwork. The real divorce happened much, much, much earlier. So it's the same thing with selling a company. Like, it was only just a couple weeks after I felt that I was ready to sell that I had a handshake deal. Like, we picked an amount that seemed fair and I was happy with it. They were happy with it. And that's really the moment that I sold the company. Then it was 8 months of paperwork. But really, for me, it happened way back then. So I had a long time to get ready, to kind of mentally prepare for this new scenario, like.
And I think divorce is a great metaphor, as is being an employee as opposed to being the boss, for what happened next. Because as I mentioned earlier, I want to take it back to that, is that you were known as the musician's musician. You were like the boss of musicians. You were paying them out every week, and everybody loved you. And in some ways, I would imagine...
Sorry, I never heard that. The boss of musicians. I never heard that.
In charge. And you were leaving that behind. So let's talk about what was next. Did you have any idea? Because in a lot of ways, when I see you at TED or you're online now, I don't know that a lot of people really understand your history with CD Baby and what you meant to musicians. It seems like CD Baby is kind of like a footnote. It's like, well, he made this big company and he sold it, but they don't understand the impact that you had for, I'm going to say, millions of musicians, because I think not only did you help the musicians on CD Baby, well over 100,000, I think you kind of changed the game when it came to iTunes and online distribution. Let's talk about what was next, because you certainly had that, but you've done a great job of reinventing yourself as, I'm going to call you a thought leader. I know it's a well-worn term, but you really are. Several million hits to your TED Talks, and a lot of people don't even know your impact with CD Baby. They just know of what you're doing now.
My big fear when selling the company was that this was the end of me, that I was going to sell my greatest creation and that everyone would forget about me and I would be a little forgotten bit of indie music history. All my new projects would be ignored and nothing I would ever do would match that success. And my gravestone would say, he made CD Baby, nothing much since. and here he lies.
Yeah, it's like that musician who had the one hit back in the 60s, right? You're never heard from again.
Yeah, and maybe he has some dear friends, that know him, but for millions of people, the only thing he did of any value was long ago, right? So that's really what I was expecting, was that kind of worst case scenario. And what's funny is then I get this little gig speaking at TED. And in fact, I think I spoke at TED 3 times. I did 3 main stage TED Talks and then another dozen little TEDx talks. What's funny is as I go around the world now, more people know me from TED. So many people will stop and say, oh man, I'm such a huge fan of your work and your TED Talks and your blog and everything. And so, what did you do before TED?
Did you know Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings?
Right. So, I think it's wonderful. Because even hearing you say that very nice, flattering question about how I changed the lives of millions of musicians, I think I've been too surrounded by the kind of tech startup geeks and the TED fans for the last couple of years that I feel that nobody knows about this past of mine, that I was in music for so long. So many people just think I'm the TED guy that writes these blog posts or whatever. So yeah, thank you. It's nice to not have CD Baby be my only creation. And I guess it's kind of encouraging to think that maybe I could do many more things before I die.
What a great segue to the next question, because you and I have a lot in common, coming up as musicians and working in a creative business, and that business being music, and then also working outside of that business with more, we'll call them tech entrepreneurs. There's a difference, wouldn't you say, when it comes to how a musician who's business savvy handles business things than somebody who maybe isn't as creative as a musician or a writer?
Yeah, I think even the most business savvy musicians still know that it's kind of this combination of right brain, left brain, right? That it's still this heart and soul mixed with business, that it's because in music that's the case. Like in music you actually can't forget the heart and soul of it, because if you do, the business dries up. Well, I'd actually never thought about it this way before until just flapping my mouth right now. And to answer your question, that the music business is proof that if you forget about the heart and soul of what you're doing, meaning like the music itself, the songs like have to be good, the music has to be good. If you forget that and just focus on the business, your business is doomed, right?
Right.
And I think that most businesses don't have that. You can go be in some widget business and focus on maximizing your profits and start to make crappy little widgets with minimum manufacturing, and that, they used to be quality built 50 years ago. Now they're lucky to last a week, and you can still somehow profit from that. But in music, you just can't. You can never forget what it's all about. You can never do the wrong thing or just kind of phone it in and expect to be a success. Yeah, I think that those of us that come from this music business background, that's just so ingrained in what business is. Like you have to keep the heart and soul in what you're doing. You have to be a nice guy. God, those stories of remember those stories we'd hear about, like Garth Brooks, how after every concert he would just stand there for 4 to 6 hours, if that's what it took, to sign every last autograph from every person that wanted one, take a photo with everybody that wanted one. He would do that stuff every night, and like never forgetting that, like, you have to do that. Like, no, you don't have to, but you do have to do that, because if you forget that, you've forgotten everything and your downfall has begun.
Well, and here's something else about Garth that not a lot of people know, but I know this from being here in Nashville and working alongside the same business. He remembers everybody's name. And if he was doing like a radio tour, he's going to remember the engineer. He's going to remember the front desk person. He's going to remember, and I don't know if it's some kind of brainiac thing that he's got, or just the way his mind works, or if there was somebody kind of cluing him in the beginning. He can remember conversations, he can remember names, and I think it's that combination of things that made people really feel important. And I think that's difficult. Let's take CD Baby as an example. When you're in a business, you weren't just shoving CDs in envelopes, putting stamps on the envelopes, and mailing CDs. I think what it did was empower musicians to get their work out. It was a check for musicians, which allowed them to live. It allowed them to continue to make music. And I think there are opportunities like that, and looking at a business like that we're not looking at in any business. Whether you're selling gasoline or you're making food, you're providing opportunity, you're providing service, you're providing hope. And that's something that we don't miss. To take it back to what you said about musicians, I think a lot of businesses don't have that kind of reaction with their audience, yet they're still in some ways doing the same thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I had nothing more to add to that. You're right.
Let's talk about looking at opportunities, because certainly when you sell out for, and I mean that in the best way possible, for multi-millions of dollars, and you're a sharp guy like you are, there are people coming with various opportunities for you to invest in or be part of.
Yeah.
So let's talk about approaching opportunities. How do you choose what you want to work with?
Well, I don't really separate business and personal, as you can probably tell. I think a lot of people act like business is just some objective thing, like the laws of physics, like there's just objective right and wrong things to do with business. But I think it's completely intertwined with who you are as a person and what kind of lifestyle you want to live. Right. So even the story you told 20 minutes ago, about how you came to visit me in my apartment and there I was just sitting alone with a stack of books and my phone didn't ring. That was a lifestyle that I wanted. Like I'm quite an introvert. My ideal career would have been to be a novelist. I love to just sit alone and work. That's my favorite way of of working. I love to just be lost in my thoughts and just be completely alone for hours on time just working. And so knowing that about myself, I wouldn't go get into a business situation that was like a very in-person, open floor plan office with 500 people all around me and answering to investors and being the CEO of a publicly traded company. Like that's not something that I would personally want, even if that's what would make the most money, right? So, so now it's kind of the same with business opportunities. I almost feel like I'm the wrong guy to ask about this, since I'm not driven by money anymore. Now that it's weird to talk about, but I have more than I will ever need. So you could say that I'm semi-retired because I'm not pursuing any business opportunities at all. But I do now do whatever interests me, even if it's going to lose money or be a certain failure, as I could do it anyway because I want to, right? So like my new series of books I put out called Wood Egg, I'm just doing this for my own self-education. But yeah, as an actual business venture, it's not a smart one. It's something I did for my own personal passion and interest, and hopefully it's interesting to others, but it wasn't really a smart business venture. So I am working on some projects now that I decided to just put them all out in the open. So on my sivers.org website, there's a section called projects. I think it's sivers.org/projects is the URL. And you can see them all there. And all those things that I'm doing now are just things that I'm doing because I want to do. So like a novelist with a story in his head, or a painter with an unfinished mural, they're just things that I want to complete and get out there just because I do. Maybe they'll be a hit, maybe they won't. But I'm doing them more for the process than the result.
What's that like, not having to worry about money?
It's awesome, man. There are, you think about like the pros and cons of it. They're all pros and no cons. Are we allowed to swear on this show?
Go for it.
It's fucking awesome. Forget all that talk about like money doesn't matter. It gives you the freedom to do what you want. It gives you this wonderful security. It relieves worry. As soon as I sold CD Baby, my very first thought was like, now I'm fucking dangerous. Because you know what? There are a whole bunch of music business ideas that I want to do, things I want to do for musicians that I don't need to make a profit anymore. And now I can squeeze out all those little scumbags that are trying to trick musicians into, pay me $100 to submit your song for a songwriting competition. And all those like scumbags are kind of like hurting musicians in the name of making them a star. I can put them out of business now because I can do a competing business and make no profit because I don't need the money anymore. That's like where my head went first, right? So it's this idea of like, I can do things just for the right reasons now and not need to include profit as a necessity. So all my business ideas now, put finger quotes around the word business. All my business ideas, all my projects I want to do are mostly things that will probably not make any money, but they're things that should exist for the sake of the musicians.
Here's the irony about it, though, because CD Baby, you looked out after musicians. You could have. I used to call you up and say, Derek, you're leaving money on the table, buddy. You need to do a book. You should do this. But you were always really musician focused. And the funny irony of it is you put out all the other competitors, put them out of business, and you ended up making money as well. So do you think that people could start off and do both? Because it seems to me like you did, and I don't think you just got lucky.
Well, I think it's kind of the Tao of business, right? That if you're selfless, that you can thrive. That the more you give, the more you get. All those cliches, they're true. That said, okay, I'm a huge believer in the fact that there are two ways to get rich. Number one, make a lot more money. Number two, need a lot less. Right? So number two is a hell of a lot easier than number one. And honestly, I think it's the best place to start. Like you just said, can somebody start by doing both? If you're talking just about profit, I think that if you start by adjusting your mindset and then shortly after your lifestyle to need less, then you can get rich really fast, right? Like once I had, I don't know, like $100,000, I was rich. And once I had 300,000, I could retire now, since I always kept my cost of living under like 20,000 a year. I don't need or even want nice things, right? Like as long as I have, let's say, a laptop, a Kindle, a bicycle, some functional clothes, and a place to sleep, that's enough for me. I still don't have an iPhone or an iPad or a TV. Still, like I just can't make myself want these things. All these things that people get all frantic about thinking they need, I never got into that. I really actively enjoy living on less. I think you can first get rich by needing less. If you have more than you need, you're rich.
Well, that's the advantage of starting out as a musician, isn't it? You just
Yeah.
you got a guitar and that's all you own.
Yeah.
You get used to not having a lot when you're starting out, and then when you get it. Yeah, well, it takes it back to that Los Angeles apartment where all there was a couch and a bunch of books and a laptop. Yeah. Sparsely furnished, but hell, I mean, that's less to deal with, right?
Yeah, and now I replace the books with a little tiny Kindle. It's even easier.
You can travel around the world because since then you've lived in Singapore for a while. You're now in New Zealand, and yeah. I'm going to just end the interview with a couple things. One, what are some action steps that people can take to make the jump when they're ready to reinvent themselves?
My big advice is to switch careers like Tarzan. When you see Tarzan swinging on the vines in the jungle, right? Like if you can imagine the old cartoons or whatever of Tarzan or George of the Jungle or whatever, like swinging through jungle, he is swinging through the vines and he doesn't let go of the previous vine until the next vine is in his hand. And as you're swinging through the jungle, once you've got the next vine in your hand, and it's supporting your weight, then you can let go of the previous vine. And that's how you swing through the jungle. So don't take a jump, take a step, and then keep 1 foot in each until the new one can support you. Yes, it's harder, but it's infinitely smarter. I sound like a reckless guy that's passionate and following my heart and all that stuff. But honestly, man, every change I made in my life, even becoming a full-time musician, I held down my day job using every sick day and every vacation day for days that I had paid gigs as a musician. And I did that for a few years. I held down both full-time jobs. Like I was a full-time musician and a full-time, other thing, until I was making more money from music than from my day job. And then I could quit. And then same thing when I started CD Baby. I was still like a gigging, touring musician. And only when CD Baby started to take over my life and was clearly profitable and the money was coming in from CD Baby, only then did I stop doing gigs and producing people's records and whatever. Don't quit your previous thing until the new one is supporting your weight. Change careers like Tarzan.
You mentioned your Kindle. What's on your Kindle right now?
That's the danger of the Kindle. I guess, even with physical books, we would do that where you'd buy more books than you can read and you'd get them all stacked up, queued up in a line of things that you want to read.
Oh, yeah.
The Kindle's even worse for that because now it's just the tiniest little impulse item. You don't even have to go to the bookstore and add something to your stack. You click oh, that looks interesting. Add. Oh, well, look at that.
Yeah, it's like a rat pushing the button, right?
Yeah. So honestly, what I did, I'm just such I don't want to say avid reader, but the books that I've read have just changed my life so much. So much of who I am and every word that's coming out of my mouth in this conversation is because of the books that I've read. So many of my philosophies, even the way that life feels easy to me now is because of the books I read. Like I read a lot of those self-improvement books when I was like 19 years old and really got that stuff into my head so that, life is easier when you have a good philosophy and approach to it. So anyway, my book recommendations or my readings and what I've learned from books are so important to me that I actually made it a special section on my website. It's called my book notes. If you go to sivers.org, about halfway down, you'll see a little stack of books, and you click on it. I have I list every single book I've read for the past 6 or 7 years now. I've been doing this, and you can sort them in order of date. But when you go to that page, I actually, by default, I have them sorted with my best recommendations at the top. You can see I give everything a 1 to 10 rating. And so my 10 out of 10s are at the top, my most highly recommended books. And so I write up a little description of each. But more importantly, I actually take detailed notes as I'm reading. So you can actually get little cliff notes of the book by reading my notes. But of course, the ones I put at the top, I highly recommend you get the whole thing. So yeah, those are my top recommendations.
So when you read, are you reading every word? Are you somebody who skims? Are you somebody who just goes to the section that you want to learn?
Oh, no, I read slow. I read every word. I read every word with if it's a paper book, I've got the pen in my hand. If it's a Kindle, I use the little underlining, highlighting feature. I study these things, man. I only get books that I really want to learn something from, and I study. I treat them like I'm going to be quizzed on it later.
Well, you kind of are, I imagine, with writing so many great book reviews.
Or it's just, I think that life, it's like the reason I'm going to put 10 hours into sitting with this book is because I really want to get these lessons under my skin, right? Like ideally, everything I read would be like part of my DNA now. Like I want to memorize this stuff. I want to have it come naturally so that next time, this certain problem or situation comes up, I know how to react to it instinctively because I took the lessons of this book very personally,
Well, speaking of books, you put out one with Seth Godin's Domino Project, Anything You Want. Excellent book, available via Kindle.
Yeah.
It's available in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, everything, I hope. Yeah, it's kind of the stuff we were talking about today. So honestly, if you're somebody that made it all the way through this interview and got to the end, you'd probably like this book because it's this kind of stuff. It's the kind of like, it was a couple of years after I sold CD Baby. I just wanted to finish that chapter of my life by looking back and thinking about everything I learned, like the mistakes I made. Like I'm very, very open about all of the things I did wrong. My ego is strong enough. I don't need to puff myself up. So I really just openly share all the big mistakes I made in hopes that somebody reading it can avoid those mistakes in the future. So I share all the mistakes and some of the things I did right. And it's a very kind of candid and open account. And it's 88 pages. It's like a nice little 1 hour read. It's just a little $5 book. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
It's a fun book. It's a quick read. And Derek, I'm going to be waiting for your novel now that I know you're a wannabe novelist.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.